Is Socialist Home, Cold War Domesticity, Reconfiguration of Interior Space in Housewives in the 1950s People's Republic of China. In no other time in history of modern China has the connection between state and family been more emphasized and imposed upon daily life than the socialist period of People's Republic of China. Along with mass renovation and reconstruction of living areas, the first 10 years of the PRC witnessed various campaigns taking place in both the political and domestic realms, and increasing reconfiguration of women in and outside their homes. The state made every effort to oversee both the families and its specialization. As Tanny Barlow says in her study of women in the 20th century China, the modern socialist 家庭, home or family, and Maoist 国家, meaning state, coexisted in unity as concept metaphors for each other. My paper here examines the mass project of resettling urban workers in 1950s PRC from the perspective of spatial practices and the remaking of domesticity. I examine both the actual designing plans of these living areas and representations of this domestic space in the state-sponsored magazine, The People's Pictorial. I took the two paths because the making of Socialist Home took place on two fronts, materially through reconfiguring space of everyday life, and discursively through discussions, interpretations, and representations of an ideal family within the constructed space. Published on the very first issue of the state-sponsored pictorial magazine, 人民画报, the photo collage was meant to demonstrate New China's achievements in short year through the lens of factory workers. Here, a better life was concretized as a cluster of new apartments and, in the workers' new home, a domestic corner in the left part. A domestic corner where a young mom was dressing her baby was the likely companion of educational radio program. This new apartment is more than physical space that accommodated PRC's urban workers. It has become a crucial arena for the citizens to formulate their socialist habits of life, a campaign concerning both the state building and citizen building. PRC's socialist construction was heavily molded on its Soviet predecessor. The communal apartment was first conceived by Lenin right after the Russian October Revolution to practice utopian ideologies and to destroy bourgeois banality. The spatial form then became ubiquitous in Stalin years. In China, a sense of utopian communality was often sketched in the visual representation. Here is a 1955 poster. It shows a nuclear family housed in a typical Soviet-style one-room apartment. The large room that shelters a family of four works in triple function as a living room, a bedroom, and a study room. Although life and work are fused in this confined space, the smiling faces testify to satisfaction with their home. A perfect order is established in the spatial geometry. The older sister looks intently at her mother and her younger brother, whose eyesight fall on the father. Probably the only bread earner in this household, the father is so focused on his work that he turned his back against the family, occupying the brightest corner of the room. The gazes of the family, by no means mutual, follow the direction of the interior hierarchy contained in the difference-erasing apartment. The actual design of the communal apartment can be divided into two types. One kind in upper picture of standardized apartment adopts an inner corridor structure. Rooms are located on both sides of the corridor, and residents on the same floor have to share kitchens, washrooms, and sometimes shower rooms. Often found in university and single employee dormitories, this inner corridor structure with public bathrooms and kitchens was a Soviet-style microcosm of the society breaking private boundaries. Another form, on the down part, was a communal house for families. It has a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment. It is a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment. It was actually shared by more than one family. Such communal houses gained the nickname a courtyard in the building, meaning a hodgepodge of daily utensils from several families was crammed into one apartment. However, in this cult to communal and collective living, the issue of privacy gradually emerged as a key word after the mid-1950s. It is related to the relatively loose political environment at that time. In 1956, the state launched a new campaign called Let the 100 Flower Bloom to encourage free expression in the cultural field. Emboldened architects started to critique this communal living and called for a de-Stalinist reflection upon designing interior space. One plan they came upon was to shrink the housing model and design more rooms so that a family could enjoy an exclusive apartment. They proposed an open corridor apartment compound, it's in the upper hand. In the new design, all the apartments were arranged on one side of the building, and thus each room was longer and narrower compared with the previous spacious design. More importantly, this design abandoned common kitchen and bathrooms, in transferring these two spaces into their smaller apartments. In each dwelling, a buffer zone consisted, as we can see from the upper part, a buffer zone consisted of a small kitchen and a bathroom between the public corridor and inner rooms. The long and narrow living room was often half divided into several resting areas for the senior, for the children, and particularly for the housewives. A major principle was that the rooms for the housewife should not be traversed, and for this reason they are often located in the north and western side, because the housewives spend most of the time at home and they need quiet space. The privacy that the architects strove for was a compromised one, for one still has to share a room with either one's parents or siblings. Yet the possibility of demarcating a territory as one's own home marks the birth of a new domestic culture, one that reconciles collectivity with individuality. In this process, housewives became an important factor in designing interior space. Their roles as keepers and protectors of one's home were affirmed and recognized. The tendency to look back at domestic life world and housewives was unusual because it runs contrary to the expansion of political society in socialist China and its emphasis on mass participation and the state feminism that seeks to liberate women through their social work. Socialist discourse on women liberation did not start with the private domestic space. On the contrary, but the escape from one's home and family. Whenever family was mentioned, it denotes a sight of feudalist remnants that confine women around her suffocating kitchen stove. Little about the domestic labor was mentioned in mass media. In fact, here I quote, women's domestic responsibility, which utterly saturated their daily routines, could not be voiced, much less addressed as a labor problem. A socialist woman could only acquire political identity through her public labor, and in order to help women step out of their private sphere, street committees were responsible for educating and resettling housewives. Additionally, each work unit must establish facilities such as daycare centers and cafeterias so that female workers could leave for work without worrying about her kid. In the state's plan, socialization of housework would free women from the double burden of work and domestic chores. Visual culture in the early 1950s generally reflected the state's advocacy for socializing housework. On its cover of another state-sponsored magazine, Women of China, the cover often portrayed women in a working setting. Images about child caring, cooking, and caring for the old were always set in the context of collective facilities, such as daycare centers or canteens, rather than in the private room. Women were seldom represented in the domestic scene, since the socialist woman was first and foremost identified with her work. In an interview with a worker in her family, his wife, who is a full-time housewife, remained anonymous throughout the article. In the early years after the founding of the PRC, official views inclined to the opinion that housewives were parasites and tried to push housewives out of their household into production. The animosity against housewives was the product of the acute lack of labor caused by the decades of war before the founding of PRC and the Korean War broken in the early 1950s. This critical tone towards housewives began to change when women labor was seen as a surplus in governmental institutions. It happened significantly around 1956, when the designs of interior space emphasized privacy and exclusiveness. Starting from the mid-1950s, in order to reduce cost, the government started to send women with more than one kid back home. In 1957, the People's Daily started a nationwide debate on the value of housewives and housework. A crucial question was whether women should resign and return home to do domestic work. In this debate, common readers wrote to the newspaper and voiced their opinions. Most readers, men and women, believed that staying at home was good for both the housewife's health and the family's well-being. In a letter from a husband, housework was equally glorious with the productive labor. The concluding editorial remarked that some women cadres were either not well educated or physically weak, and some had many children to look after. As a result, they couldn't fulfill their responsibility as a cadre despite their goodwill. The government opinion was adamantly that for the sake of national interests, those women should resign their post. So here we see the working women are sort of fused with the housewives, and they became this fluid group of labor, resilient and flexible to the state's redistribution and mobilization. In correspondence to the party state's policy in the mid and late 1950s, housewives received more visibility in visual culture. A kitchen scene first appeared in the People's Pictorial under the title Domestic Chore here. The daily routine turned out to go beyond traditional housework. Besides daily chores, the mother also spent time reading, traveling, and helping their neighbors with their domestic work. The appreciation of domestic Rome was unprecedented in the history of the PRC. The ascension of privacy and relatively positive portrayal of housewives in the late 1950s PRC can be internationally contextualized in the interest in domesticity during the Cold War period. An inward turn occurred after the end of the Second World War that cared for mass housing and national construction. The life world speaks to a nation's economic power and ideological superiority. The 1959 kitchen debate between the United States and Soviet Union best exemplifies the competition on lifestyle. In an exhibition at Moscow, a typical American home was displayed, celebrating the victory of consumerism. Also, 3 cubicles of Miracle Kitchen from American Utopian Future outstood as centerpiece of the exhibition, demonstrating convenience food and robotic floor cleaning, showing how the technologies could facilitate housewives' life. And not to be defeated, the Soviet Union prepared their exhibition as well, also in a domestic setting. The Everything for Soviet Men display includes an ideal Soviet kitchen. It was less technologized, but equally impressive and convenient. In the opening ceremony of the exhibition, Khrushchev and the then Vice President of the United States, Richard Nixon, engaged in a heated debate. They introduced boastfully their own country's superior design of interior space, especially the kitchen, and drew remarks on the other's display in a lightly sarcastic tone. The ideological competition behind the kitchen debate showcases the fusion of military and civilian dimensions. Home, as a crucial third front, had joined the arms race and the space race and became the living standard race. Although the PRC was not directly involved in this exhibition, I argue that the ascending importance of the interior and everyday space and the recognition of housewives as a socialist component constituted an implicit local prehistory to the kitchen debate and the larger global Cold War competition on the home front. Actually, the picture that they saw here, according to the editor, is to reply Japanese readers' letter who would like to know what the daily life of the People's Republic of China looked like. And they chose this very domestic kitchen scene to represent the whole daily life or everyday life of PRC. So to conclude, my paper examines the representation of housewives and domestic space in different areas in People's Republic of China. Both objects by study are intriguing in the way that they are oftentimes deprived of historical importance, if not made totally invisible, in discussions of women in the Mao era. In a time of thriving state feminism that encourages women to step out of their domestic realm and portrays female models in working place, female laborers naturally drew much attention. However, while women's engagement with the public was a project of both political and economical significance, housewives and their housework never disappeared, despite such radical socialization. And socialist domesticity was much more than being passively conquered and revolutionized. There was a fleeting period in the mid-1950s that the state discourse bent for the value of domestic culture. This valorization of domesticity, although in an extremely short period of time, resonates with the Cold War politicization of house and home. Thank you.